I had a safety plan. If this gets worse, this is what I'm going to do. I was honest with the people close to me that I trust. Thank God for them. And I have some good relationships with people inside the rooms who understand enough about the mental health piece to know that it wasn't just untreated alcoholism that was going on with me, right?
So it's Jason Macmillan. He's one of our returning guests here, definitely part of the Ashes Awesome family. Certainly one of the most relatable people that I've ever had on the show. I think that was his 4th appearance now. He's just a great guy, and I hope you really enjoyed the episode. We talk about mental health quite a bit in this episode, including medication, that type of thing, and how it relates to the 12-step communities, or rather, how some people in the 12-step communities relate to it, to the mental health piece, and of course, medication and that. It's a really great episode. Jason has some really good insight, so I hope you enjoy it. Listen, the title sponsor for today's episode is the Yatra Trauma Center. They're located in Krabi, Thailand. Here where I reside, I was fortunate enough to experience the residential treatment program, which, of course, if you can make it to Thailand, I highly recommend it. You might be surprised at the cost relative to other options in the rest of the world. However, if you can't make it to Thailand, they do offer some online services. They specialize in internal family systems therapy, EMDR therapy, which absolutely changed my life, and of course, cognitive behavior therapy as well. And you can learn more about them and see some episodes that Mike Miller, the head clinician, has started if you come to HOApodcast.com/trauma. And in the meantime, I hope you really enjoy this episode. Hello, everybody. Watchers, listeners, supporters of all kinds. Welcome to another episode of the Ashes to Awesome podcast. I'm your host, Chuck LaFlange, checking in from Krabi, Thailand. Halfway around the world is my lovely co-host, Dr. Lisa in Calgary, Alberta. How are you doing today, Lisa?
I'm good. I don't know. It's been a busy week. It's been a hectic week. And it's just Saturday morning, right? So I'm glad to be here. I feel like I get to take a deep breath and just sit and do something I enjoy. So I'm happy to be here.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Glad to have you back on as per usual. And our guest today is a returning guest, Jason Macmillan from Surrey, BC. How are you doing today, Jason?
I'm well, Chuck. I'm well.
Did you ever just get shy? Folks, pre-record here. This guy was talking up a storm, and now listen, he's just got shy on us. So what's going on, buddy?
No, when you ask that question, I usually have to think about that one for a little bit. But I'm well, just like Lisa was saying, I'm good.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff. We're happy to have you back on. So this kind of peek behind the curtain thing, and Lisa, I guess you haven't been privy to any of this either. Jason and I talk sometimes via Messenger. He leaves me 3-minute voice notes, and I listen to them and then generally respond back with like a 3-word text. But I love it. I do. That's not a complaint. It's informative. It's not me complaining. Because one of the things Jason gets quite passionate about in these more one-sided than not conversations is about mental health in the rooms. And for anybody that's somehow not aware of when I say the rooms, I mean in the 12-step communities. So, Jason, last time you were on, we had a really great conversation, as we tend to do. I should say, if you go to Jason's profile on our website, and just by clicking on the icon on him on this episode, you see some really great episodes. If you go back and listen to the first one Jason was on, it's one of my favorite all times, and it's definitely one of the most favorite by listeners as well. Back when we were doing just audio, so
it was one of my favorites.
I know,
feel like
right?
There's an inside joke that I'm missing there, but
it's not even an inside joke. What I was doing, Lisa, is I was thinking about the story about him showing up for work in his tuxedo or whatever.
I know you were
on the construction site. Right?
the professional day. Yeah.
So for me, it was, and probably still is, one of my favorites. And I think one of the gifts that you have, Jason, is you're honest, you're humble, you're insightful, you're vulnerable. And so when you talk, it's like, I feel like, I don't know, it just hits different. Like, I feel like I can really...
It's relatable. It's just...
Yeah.
Very, very relatable, right? That's
and
kind
impactful.
Of the word that I've used
like, I feel like, listening to him talk it's hit me differently than a lot of people. Yeah. It's awesome.
Hey guys, just a quick interruption for the all too important PSA. Today's PSA is brought to you by AARC. That's the Alberta Adolescent Recovery Center, located in Calgary, Alberta, where they are treating adolescents with severe SUD. They're doing amazing things there. Their program is a peer-to-peer support system, but for the whole family. It's absolutely amazing. Check them out, guys. You can learn more about them at arc.ab.ca. And in the meantime, here's Rachel from Addict with Purpose with your PSA.
Hey everyone, Rachel, Addict with Purpose here. I just wanted to briefly share about two of my favorite medications out there, naloxone and Narcan. These are medications to help prevent accidental overdose. It doesn't matter who you are. Addiction does not discriminate. There is crazy things out there today, and people are dying at really high alarming rates. So this medication here is a life-saving device. You cannot recover if you are dead, and this is how we are saving the lives of people and helping people find recovery when they're ready.
Yeah, it's awesome.
It is, right? So welcome back, Jason. All that to say,
thank you.
from both of us. Right?
Yeah, it's funny because it's still, I don't know, it's still a little, it's still uncomfortable for me to receive, compliments if I'm being honest. I was like talking to my friend last night too, and I gave him some compliments, and he just replied, "Thank you," and I said, "Oh wow, it took me like 2 years to learn how to do that." Yeah,
that's a very real struggle. I think I would dare say for most people, that's a very real struggle, right? And it really takes a lot of intent, right? It's something I find myself that I have to really, all of us, or most of us, I should never say all, but most of us, when we hear that compliment, our gut instinct is to minimize it somehow, right? Or even blatantly shy away or disagree with it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so to be able to say thank you, those two words, is actually like really tough for most of us to do. Right? So yeah.
Well, I think for me, it's easier to say thank you when I know those things are true. It's harder for me to say thank you if I'm, for lack of a better term, a shitty person. So if you guys are going to be like, oh, you're loving, caring, kind, compassionate, and I'm not any of those things, if my actions don't reflect of that, then it's probably harder for me to agree and say thank you. Do you know what I mean?
Feeling like you're not would maybe be a better way to say that, because I don't think, Jason, at any point in your life you've not been any of those things. I think your actions, your actions while your disease was running your life would have been a very different thing, right? But and go ahead. I'm going to speak for you. But,
Well, I would even say no. I agree with you, Chuck, and I think I would say our moral compass or our core values, our belief system, like that. Like I think we talked about before, it's like we don't have like a moral deficiency or anything like that. Like we're unwell, and that drives us to do some pretty fucked up things. Yeah.
And I think, something that Ryan Bathgate often talks about is when we're out of alignment with our morals and our values.
Yep.
And I think what I'm hearing when you say that, Jason, is that when you're living according to your morals and values, it's easier to say thank you to a compliment. But when someone gives you a compliment and you're aware that you're not living according to your morals and values, that getting that positive feedback, it almost highlights for you that I'm not living according to those things today. And that's when it feels more uncomfortable, maybe.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That tracks, right? Yeah.
I will just, I'll just be honest on here and like transparent. And I guess this is kind of like where we're going, that just because I think I've talked about this before, because I'm sober now and trying to adhere to spiritual principles and values doesn't mean I can't be very manipulative. I feel like that's like a behavior that's really.
I got screenshots, man. I can show you that. Absolutely.
Really ingrained in me, and it's come up. It still comes up sometimes, if I'm being honest. I'm definitely aware of it, and I just try not to be a shitty human. That's really it. But you guys didn't know me before either, or like even when I first got sober. Thank God. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much you want to talk about it. So after our last recording, it's up to you how much of your story you want to tell. As always, Jason, I wouldn't do that. What happened? So let's put you on the spot.
Uncomfortable laugh. Yeah. So I think we talked about I think
sorry. Just the way you say that is exactly what Lisa was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Uncomfortable laugh. Right. So I love it.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's all right. at at that time, I was, well, even prior to that. So I started. I knew something was like wrong with me, but I didn't know what. And then I'll just say for as long as I've been sober, I thought that um, it was really hard for me to function and day to day, if that makes sense. I I was in like a constant state and still am a lot of the time, but like thinking that people were against me. My moods would shift, my attitude, my behavior would shift to like I can be really genuine and kind and 1 minute, and then something would happen. Then Lisa's a psychiatrist; she probably knows where we're going with this one. But then I would shift to like where I'd feel super defensive. I would want to like push people away. I think it was like a trauma response, I believe. So I kept on, and it's really hard to function in life, in relationships with that, you know? So for 5 years or whatever, I just thought that we get programmed so much almost by like, when I say we, I mean like members of Alcoholics Anonymous, to think that everything is just untreated alcoholism, right? So if I'm feeling restless, irritable, discontent, I need to go to more meetings. I need to help more people. I need to do more meditation. I need to do more steps. I did all of that. I did all of it and more. I did a lot of shit. It treated the symptoms of alcoholism quite well, but I wasn't. I felt like I was again spinning my tires and I was like, hitting a wall, right? So that brought us, Chuck, until the last episode that we did, and by that time I was like, there was some events that happened that put me in a place of I would say depression. I started having suicidal thoughts, which then, so after we recorded, by that point, I believe I already took so I had a safety plan, you know, and it's like, if this gets worse, this is what I'm going to do. I was honest with the people close to me that I trust. Thank God for them. And I have a good connection, I have some good relationships with people inside the rooms who understand enough about the mental health piece to know that it wasn't just untreated alcoholism that was going on with me. Right. So they suggested I go to the hospital. I didn't really want to go to the hospital at that time. I ended up one day I just drove myself to the urgent response care center, and I was fucking. It was hard to get there, and I found I didn't want to ask for help. We talked about how hard it is to ask for help, right? And why we don't. And I go there, and it's I'm like, well, I work for this health authority. I'm like, I don't want anybody to see me. And there's some sitting there in my car. Phoenix, there's a treatment center right there. I have a spontaneous in there. I just didn't want anybody to see me. I was so ashamed, you know, and I think there's some pride and some ego. So at that exact moment as I'm sitting there, thank God, a friend of mine who works on another team for this health authority, he pulled up with his girlfriend, with his partner, wife, or whatever. So I saw him. I'm like, oh shit, I don't want him to see me here. I got out of my car, and then he saw me, and he's like, "Oh," he was like, "What's up, big man?" And then it's actually Chuck. I think we'll talk about it after, but he's actually probably gonna come on here, be a really good guest. So he thought I was working, and he was like, "What's wrong?" He's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "No." And I kind of, we talked about vulnerability. Like I got vulnerable. I started crying. I told him what was going on with me, and he's like, "Bro," he's like, "I got you." He was like, "Come in here with me," and I got connected with them. I did the little intake thing with the psych nurse, and then I connected with my GP, connected with the psychiatrist. I saw him August 17th, because I was like thinking worst case scenario was like, oh, I'm going to have to wait 6-8 months to see a psychiatrist, because typically that's what it is here, which anyhow, so that's how that started. I got connected with my doctor. I went on, she prescribed me medication, which I had my own kind of like, I would say, biases towards. I thought that if I took medication, I was gonna be like numb to everything and walk around like a zombie or something. Like that was, just pretty ignorant, I would say, right? But I knew I probably needed to be on a medication, and because what I was doing wasn't working. So I started that, and then after that episode, Chuck, I started to those thoughts, like they weren't fleeting. It kind of turned more into like an obsession and the plan. And then one night I couldn't get out of it. I just was gonna write like I was going to kill myself, and I started to think of how I was going to do it. And then I was going to write a note and think of what the note would say and who the note would be to. I was like, okay, like this is pretty bad. Right? Like I've never experienced that before. I was scared, to be honest. Like I didn't want to do it, but I knew that if I wasn't honest about that and asked for help, it might have been, probably wouldn't be here right now doing this, So I ended up, went to the hospital in Abbotsford, and they admitted me into the psych unit for the night, and thank God for them, and thank God they had a bed there, and they were pretty good, and but it's funny because I was sitting in emergency, and I'm there, and my head starts telling me, because I'm a really good bullshitter and manipulator, and I hate being in hospital, and I didn't want to be there, but I knew I needed to be there, because I don't really have very good, I've been in ICU, I don't know how many. I don't have good experiences in hospitals, we'll just say that. But so I started telling myself, I'm like, you can just bullshit these people. Do I really need to be here? And then I'm just like, okay, but I was like, I came here for a reason, So I was just to be honest with myself and with them. I told them what was going on, and then so I turned 40. I did that Facebook post. I turned 40 years old in that psych unit. That's not what I obviously planned, but I'm really grateful I got to turn 40 and I got the right help. And that brings us to, I go to quite a few meetings, and I hear a lot of things, and towards when people with very limited knowledge and no education, and they're not healthcare professionals, spout off about, if you have mental disorders, just do the 12 steps and go to more meetings and help people and all this shit. That really, we need to be fucking careful what we're saying to people, and when they come in there and they're new and they're vulnerable and they're looking at people that have been there for a while, and we're saying this stuff with confidence, like they're going to start believing that. And I believe some of it too. I thought I was like doing this like thing wrong or something. I did know enough at that point to know that I'm like, okay, something else is going on. But I think we need to have enough humility to say, I have no opinion on this. I'm not a fucking therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psych nurse. I'm not a healthcare professional. And it talks about, actually, is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So there's how it works. It says there are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. So it's all in there, right? And I guess I wish that, and this isn't everybody, right? But I've heard a lot of things that I just cringe when I hear that. I'm like, that's gonna kill people. Do you know what I mean? Like yeah. So it's concerning, right? But I don't know if that answered your question, Chuck. But so since our last episode, I was just talking to a couple of friends of mine. I've actually like experienced like happiness and peace for the first time in a while. I'm doing a lot of, I've added some other things too. As like I said, I'm doing gratitude lists and cold showers and saunas and stuff like that. So I think all those things are beneficial. I don't believe on just like me like relying on the medication, but I think the adding the medication and getting the right one and the right dose has been a fucking complete game changer for me.
Yeah, we were talking about that pre-record, right? And that's absolutely amazing, right? It's funny, and I wanted you to talk about, Jason, because I think the humility that your doctor expressed to you about your mental health, and because we're sitting here with Lisa right now, I think it's a very relevant thing. So why don't you talk about that for a second? Yeah.
Well, she's amazing. She's fucking amazing. Super grateful for her. So it's now I have, we talked about a lot about like support groups inside recovery or support network, how important that is. Well, now I have like healthcare professionals involved in my, my psychiatrist and my doctor, a huge part of that. So she didn't want to, when I was still having those suicidal thoughts, she didn't want to do anything with my medication, like changing the dose or changing the medication, unless we were convinced it was the medication, because I was still having those thoughts when I was in the psych unit. The on-call psychiatrist increased my medication. She doubled it. And I think they were just trying to, keep me like alive or whatever the hell. But nonetheless, she knew that I had that appointment coming up with the psychiatrist on August 17th. So she didn't want to really be too involved when it comes to that. She's like, that's not my, I guess like main scope of practice. So she, definitely had enough humility to say like, I'm not this isn't like my thing for whatever, right? So, which I really appreciate her not doing that. She allowed me to make like decisions. She trusted my input, and she wasn't just like quick to say, like when I said, hey, like I want to adjust my dose, she wasn't like, no, you know how some doctors can be, right? I feel like there's a lot of ego attacked like sometimes with some of them. But that wasn't my experience with her at all. So she's been amazing and supportive. She actually sent me a referral for counseling as well. So I've been doing that, and yeah.
Wow, that's awesome, right?
My psychiatrist
just the idea,
awesome,
though, that a GP would say, no, why don't you talk to a psychiatrist about that and let them kind of be the focus. I think that shows a lot of humility, right?
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Lisa, what you got to say? You've always got something to say.
Mic drop. I don't need to say anything. And I often feel like that. Like I'll see Jason's posts, where he sort of says the same stuff that he's talking about now. And to me, like I just am so aligned with his views on that, Yeah. I think there's a lot of people out there who believe that, well, if you go see a psychiatrist, of course they're going to give you labels, they're going to give you diagnoses, they're going to make you take medication. And I don't believe that at all. Not only because I don't practice that way, but if you go back residency through today, you're looking at 11 years of me working with a lot of psychiatrists through my training and then as colleagues. And I just don't see the people that I work with being that way either. To me, I'll say to patients that if we're going to diagnose something, whether it is, a depression, an anxiety disorder, a trauma disorder, or whether it's a personality trait or personality disorder, there's no motive for me to put labels on people. Like that is not my goal. But I've met patients who, at the end of the day, my impression will be one that it's largely personality based and that what they need is therapy, not medication. And I'll have those patients say to me, I've been doing therapy for 10 years, and it's done nothing for me. Then we dig into, okay, what have you been doing in therapy? Like what modalities are you learning? And then we realize that they haven't been doing the right modality of therapy. So they've spent a decade of their money and their time seeing a therapist and not actually doing the correct modality for their personality. So that's where it's like, if we're not going to explore and figure out what your personality is, what your diagnosis is, then you run the risk of being on the wrong medications or doing the wrong type of therapy. So it is important for us to figure that stuff out, not to put labels on people, but so that we can set them up with the right supports. Because not everything needs medication. Not everything needs, modality X of therapy. So, and I completely agree with Jason on the risk of swinging too far to the direction of all you need to do is. It's like even the other day I saw a post on social media of somebody who, again, is not a medical professional. And it was this rant about, if you have depression, you don't need medication. You need good food and you need sunshine and you need exercise. Yes, you do. But if you have clinical depression, and neurotransmitters in your brain are not at the levels they need to be at, then there's a real danger in telling somebody that all they need is, because then what happens is if that person is clinically depressed, then they start to go out and they take it on as like it was my fault. Like I'm just not eating well enough. I'm just not getting enough sun. And it becomes this thing that they feel they should be able to fix. Now, there's a certain element of that, but if that person then goes out and they eat well and they exercise and they sit in the sunshine and they're not getting better, well, then they're going to be more hopeless because they're like, well, I'm doing it wrong. I'm inadequate. I can't fix this. This is never going to get better. And then in comes things like suicidal ideation. And so, or I've also had patients tell me, like, I'm afraid to tell my sponsor that I'm on an antidepressant.
See, that is so, yeah,
right?
that is a problem with your sponsor.
So there's a lot of
right?
danger to that.
Absolutely.
Because obviously you want people to be honest with themselves and with their support network. And you don't want to minimize that all they need to do and make it out like the recipe to their healing is really simple. Because if it's not simple, or if it's not just a one piece recipe, then they start to believe that they're doing it wrong, or they're not capable, or they're inadequate, and then hopeless, right? Because it's I'm doing all the things.
Jason just spoke to that, right? Where he thought he wasn't doing it right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's crazy. Right?
And I'll say to
crazy
people,
is probably the wrong word to use in this context, but
yeah. But it's like, if somebody has diabetes, do we tell them that will you just, sleep more and relax more and meditate more and, go for nature walks more? Do you believe that then their pancreas is just going to magically make more insulin?
Of course not. Right. Yeah.
Your brain is an organ. There are neurotransmitters, there are chemicals in our brain that dictate if we're anxious, if we're depressed, if we're psychotic, if we're manic. Why do we want to oversimplify it? And again, I fully believe in behavioral activation. I believe in the fact that we need a community. We need to be surrounded by people. If we isolate ourselves alone in our basement in the dark, we're not going to feel good. So yes, we need community. We need to get ourselves moving. We need endorphins. We need exercise. We need good food. We need sleep. We need all of that. But if we're doing those things and our brains are not capable of producing the necessary chemicals to help us feel well, then sometimes we need medication.
Absolutely. Right. And I think if you're talking to somebody who's unwell in the first place and is walking, especially to a newcomer, right? But anybody with any amount of time, just by default, the people that you're speaking to in a 12-step space are sick to different degrees, right? So all of those things you said, Lisa, are just exasperated that much more when somebody's, especially, coming off of, or when they're new, right? So you're feeling shitty, you're feeling all of these things, and you're placing trust in the old timers, if you want to call them that, the people that have been around for a few years. So their words mean so much to you. You don't need medication. That means so much more than some asshole on social media spouting off, a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, right? But and even more so the case when you're in a recovery community, right? So much more. I can tell you, back when, and you remember this, when I was still in Calgary, Lisa, when I finally got some medication for ADHD, and the difference it made to me. Do you remember that? It was one of my family members. Well, you know me, I'm not a medication person, and to this day, when I'm having a bad day with it, and I'm frustrated, I think about that, and it makes me so angry. You're not really right,
And still, I'll have patients say that to me, and I'll say to them, if you went in and the doctor told you that you had an infection, would you take the antibiotics? 9.9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. And I'll say to them, would you go home and Google your antibiotic to see all the potential side effects and what might happen? No one Googles their antibiotic. I promise you, if you Google your antibiotic, because anything that's ever happened to somebody on an antibiotic, they're going to list it. And it's there are, in some cases, some pretty nasty side effects that you can get, but we still take the antibiotic because if we have a bacterial infection, we need the antibiotic, And same thing, people who say, well, I'm not a medication person. If your doctor said today that you have diabetes, would you take your metformin? Would you take your insulin? 9 times out of 10, they would take it. So these people who say they're not medication people, they're often not psychotropic medication people. And so then the question is why? Why is it that you would take the antibiotic and the metformin and the heart disease medications, but you're going to think real hard about whether you're going to take your antidepressant or antipsychotic or whatever?
Or even worse, stigmatize somebody else for doing it. Right?
And to me, there's the only explanation is stigma.
Of course it is. course it
It's
is,
stigma.
right?
So it's like, it's not
And
that you're a medication or not a medication person. It's that you have deep-rooted stigma against mental illness,
Mhm.
and you're
absolutely,
putting that under the guise of, I'm not a medication person.
yes.
Mhm.
Jason, I think as I'm sitting here listening, and thoughts forming at 1,000 miles an hour in my own head,
Mhm.
as they tend to do. This message brought to you by ADHD. Um, as awful as it is that you went through that experience, obviously it's. I mean, we're all very grateful that
Mhm.
that you're still with us.
Mhm.
Very, very grateful for that.
Mhm.
As awful as that you went through with it, I think the silver lining, or some other cliche, if you want to throw it at that, is that, as I said to you pre-record, you found a hill for you to plant your flag. Right. So you can be that person in the rooms who says, hey, no. Right. And we've seen it on your rants, your tangents on Facebook. And I don't mean that negatively. I mean that quite positively.
Yeah.
Right. When you make a
Yeah.
post about mental health awareness. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's, if you continue to do what you're doing and you continue to spread that message,
Mhm.
that whatever suffering, and I can't speak for you, but I would say whatever suffering you went through to get to that point, and to that passionate understanding,
Mhm.
has been worth it.
Oh,
Right.
absolutely. And yeah, and it was
You
like, I kind of see it now also, Chuck, and it's like, I think it talks about it actually in one of our step 9 promises. We'll see how, no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others, right? So it's another added piece to that, really.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
It's,
so
and so you just did it.
it,
You just minimized the compliment. You see what you did there, right? So gotcha. So because not many people are doing that, right?
Mhm.
It's too easy to buy into that 12 steps will cure everything, when it's really good at what it's good for,
Mhm.
but it doesn't help everything, right? And it's even easier to just stay silent if you believe different. So the fact that you're not being silent about that, I think, is a really big deal.
Mhm.
Does it
Right.
ever come
So,
up in the rooms, Jason? Like, I know you'll post about it, and it's always like super eloquently put, and I love it. But in the rooms, do you find yourself kind of keeping that to yourself because you think, well, if I share this view in the room, I'm going to get shut down? Or
Well,
did you before, or do you now? I'll add to her question, and I'll leave it at that and let you answer. So, yeah.
okay, so so for quite a while now, I still go to lots of meetings, and I get asked to share. I share. I do, and even prior to all this, I would talk about the importance of seeking outside professional help. More specific probably to counseling, because I didn't really know enough much about the mental health piece. I knew that mental health was a thing, but so after kind of going through my experience and being pretty passionate about it, and also listening to other people talk, like I've heard some of the things I've heard are fucking wild. And actually I was at this one meeting, this is a few months ago, and I'm sitting in there, and a couple guys, they got up, they've been sober a long time, and they have best intentions. Their intentions are really good. However, they started to say, if you have anxiety, depression, just need to help somebody. It's like, well, not necessarily. So then there's me in there. I've helped a shit ton of people, and I help people. And that wasn't my experience. So, nonetheless, another guy, he was actually, I talked to him after. He's a registered nurse, and it was funny because he was the last person they asked to share. He got up there and just said, please don't tell people to stop taking their medication. Talk about some of the consequences attached to that. We're not healthcare professionals. We're not educated, So I actually went and I spoke to them after. I said, thank you for doing that. And so to answer your question, Lisa, I'm not worried about I do openly talk about it, right? I try to make it also very clear for the people that are new that seeking professional help, whether it be for trauma or for mental health, probably will not keep you sober. It did not keep me it's an added piece. I think it's important. I think let's get sober first. Let's stay sober. Let's build a solid foundation. Let's build a support network, and then maybe we'll look at those things after, you know. And for lots of us, there's other things, right? So I am quite passionate about it, and almost like I almost get a little bit angry. You can probably hear that in my voice when I when I share sometimes about because it's just super, it's irresponsible. It's really irresponsible, and just I'm more concerned about, like, I don't want people to fucking die, and it's already hard enough, this thing on its own, right? And let alone mental health into it, and trauma. And so when it's confusing, and when people, again, when they come in and they're super new and they're vulnerable and they're looking for direction and they're looking for help, and they're looking towards the people that have been around, and when we're saying things with confidence, like I fucking believed it. I would believe anything that they said. I was so desperate, you know. I just trusted they knew what they were talking about. But this is the thing, and I've heard this. You know, if you want an opinion, ask an alcoholic or addict. If you want the facts, if you want the truth, you go to the literature and the program, and it's all right there. So,
yeah.
And then how true is that, right? Like, it's been my experience. So,
so you said something there, Jason, that I do want to hold on for a second, because we talked about this recently, Lisa. You and I did. I made a reel about it. That's why I remember. That the idea that when somebody first gets there, let's get sober, and then let's look at the mental health. And Lisa spoke about this in a recent reel, right, where she spoke to so many of those symptoms that may, you know, a lot of the behaviors that may present as XYZ are not XYZ when somebody gets sober, right? And they stop having narcissistic traits, or they stop being an asshole, and they stop being all these things, right? So I think it's important that you said that, Jason. Really important that you said that, actually. Yeah.
Well, because
let's get sober and then figure it out.
Well, alcoholism is a disease. When it goes untreated, we need to treat the symptoms of alcoholism, right?
Yeah.
So when that goes untreated, there's people that make the supreme sacrifice that fucking kill themselves from untreated alcoholism, you know. And like, so it must be kind of confusing to try to, it's like, what is this? You know, but I believe it's like, okay, once we're separated from substances for long enough, and maybe once we do something to treat the symptoms of alcohol, you know, inside the rooms, it's like, well, let's go through a set of steps, because that's what we do, right? Yeah, but again, it's definitely not a cure-all. So
is that the right terminology, Lisa? Find a baseline. Did I say that right?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I sort of agree yes and no. Because, so for example, you can have alcohol-induced depressive disorder, right? Alcohol is a depressant. And so if you've got somebody who has alcohol use disorder, they will often describe all sorts of depressive symptoms. In the moment, you know, if they're still actively drinking or they've just stopped drinking, it's really hard to tell, like, is this all because of the drinking? And so there's alcohol as a chemical that is a depressant, right? So it's like, is it that this is in your system or recently in your system, and it's making you present as depressed? Then if you have someone who has alcohol use disorder or any kind of substance use disorder, there's the consequences of their substance use disorder that can also make them look depressed, right? It's like, well, my wife left me and I lost my job. My kids won't speak to me. And so I'm stressed out and I go to bed and I perseverate and I can't sleep. So there's the consequences of the untreated substance use disorder that can present as depression. And then there's depression because there's an imbalance of chemicals in your brain. But so my approach to something like that, like if I had a patient that I was working with like that, first off, it's the education piece. It's like, I don't know. I don't know if you were sober, if you'd still be depressed or not, right? I don't know if you and your wife fixed your marriage and your kids called you, if you would still feel depressed. But I will often treat that depression.
Okay.
You know, now what I would say to somebody is, obviously, yes, we need to figure out how to get you off the booze, right? So it's like, let's get you into a residential treatment program, or let's get you connected to outpatient treatment, depending on what's appropriate for the patient. But I would often say to that person, regardless of whether your depression is caused by A, B, or C, the reality is right now you're feeling depressed. And so my approach in a case like that would be to put them on something for the depression while also working on the substance use disorder, working on the therapy. I would do it all. And I would say to them,
And I guess it's
you
not
know,
like it's a
6
commitment for over time.
No, it's like I would
right.
say,
We
you know,
we
when
can look
you've
at this in a
got,
month and adjust accordingly, kind of thing,
yep,
right? So,
yep. And
yeah.
so it's down the road. Like if we can
Mhm.
help you to get sober and to stay sober, and you're starting to feel really well, then down the road we could have a conversation about, do we want to try backing this off, stopping
Okay.
it, and seeing what's there, right?
Mm.
But to not treat somebody because, oh well, they were, you know, they've just gotten sober from alcohol and it's probably the alcohol. It's like, maybe, but if they're depressed
Mm.
right now, then let's boost their serotonin and see if we can help them. Because the other
Yeah.
thing is, if someone is depressed, they're more likely to fall back to the substance too, to just numb it,
Yeah.
Um,
There's that.
right?
There's that.
I've actually, I believe for a long time, as long as I was just abstinent, you know, so I've been separated from drugs and alcohol countless times. I thought that my life would get significantly better. It actually got worse. It got worse when you
Okay.
separated me from substances, because now I have to sit in me, and I don't have
Oh yeah.
a solution anymore, being the drugs and
There's
alcohol, right?
something to
So
be said for self-medicating, right? It's you know,
well,
works rather well until it doesn't. But
yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So I agree. So I think, you know, the big one for me is the personality disorders, that I'm like, I'm not touching personality disorders unless I've got collateral from reliable people about what you were like pre-substances. Like, I'm not going to say that you're a narcissist or you're antisocial or whatever, because I think people in active addiction will be manipulative and deceitful because that's how they feed their disease. And so I won't
Absolutely.
go there. I won't label people in active addiction with those sorts of things. But if I think that they're anxious or they're depressed, then I will try to treat that, recognizing that substances may be contributing to it, but knowing too that if I can try to treat those things, I think we set people up for greater success in becoming abstinent and staying abstinent.
I think it's, Lisa, if you went back and you probably won't watch this episode because I know you typically don't watch your own, but you went back when you said people in active addiction can be manipulative and you could just see the two of us identically like relating, like, yeah, that's totally true. Yeah.
Well,
you know,
I was even going to say too, is like people also not in active addiction, like again, separating people from substances and myself being included. I was the exact same person until I changed my behavior. So I was still dishonest, manipulative, selfish, self-centered, still justify, rationalize, like all of these things. We're literally the exact same person without substances.
Yeah.
Do you know, like?
Do you think some of that, Jason? Do you think, through years of active substance use, again, it becomes habitual, right? Because in active substance use, you have to, you have to be manipulative and deceitful so that you can stay in your addiction.
Yeah.
Do you think that when you first got sober, that some of that ongoing behavior, was that because that had become your habit now? This is how I operate.
Yeah, that's how we survive. You know, and for like a lot of us, like me, I was out there for a long time, so those behaviors were so ingrained in me. That was my default setting. So just because I'm all of a sudden, I'm not going to say sober, I'm going to say abstinent, I'm still exactly the same person. It takes time, and I think there's like so many moving parts to it. Maybe that somebody was only out there for like a couple months, their experience might be a bit different. Not to minimize that, So yeah.
And I always go back. I mean, I think I knew this baseline anyway, and I knew this through family, like my own family experiences and whatnot. But I had this patient who was with me for about 13 months in the hospital, and really sadly ended up, he had developed schizophrenia, so had been, into some really heavy drug use, had repeated substance-induced psychotic episodes, and then got to a point where even without the drugs, we couldn't get the psychosis to go away. And, had a diagnosis of schizophrenia, was quite functionally impaired, and ended up needing to go live in, a facility for the rest of his days. Glad to know. I think it's been a few years since he's been out, and he's healthy and happy. And, I have colleagues who still see him in the community at the place he lives at, and he's doing quite well. But this is a guy who, had been diagnosed as antisocial personality disorder. Basically like someone who does bad things and, I'm not kidding you. This guy was an absolute sweetheart, like a pussycat, you know? I remember being in hospital and almost getting assaulted by an unwell psychotic patient, and he stepped in and got between me and this patient. And once he was sober, and also it wasn't just sober, he was sober, his illness was treated, he was in a place where he was being treated with respect, he was cared for, he was safe, he had a bed, he had food. There was like nothing about his personality that I would have called antisocial. You know,
Mm,
he was an incredibly soft, kind human being. But again, during his years of active addiction, and then I think for a period thereafter, because again, it's this becomes a habit. Um, but yeah, it was just so interesting to read old documentation about this patient and then to see the version of him that I got to know over the course of a year. Yeah, just no way. I don't buy it. You know, it's what addiction does. Just one of the
mhm,
many things, right, that it
mhm.
does.
Mhm.
Yeah. Can I ask you something, Jason?
Mhm.
And again, if you don't want to talk about it on here, it's totally fine. But I keep thinking about that description of you sitting there feeling suicidal, thinking about the note, and then
Mhm.
ultimately taking yourself to ask for help,
Mhm.
right? Like, I just feel like that is so profound. Um, and I feel so sad that you were in that place. You know, just thinking about you sitting somewhere, thinking about doing that and writing the note and who to write, like all of that, like it just breaks my heart.
Mhm.
Um, and, you know, if you ever find yourself there again, please call me. But I'm wondering, like, have you reflected on that time in a way that you can speak to it? But what do you think helped you choose path B and not path A? You know, because
Mhm.
that's the thing, is that reaching out, making the phone
Mhm.
call, asking for help in those moments, that's what's so damn hard
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
so many reasons.
Mhm.
What do you think it was that stopped you from acting on those thoughts and instead going and asking for help?
Mm. That's a good question. It's if I had to, when I think about that one, I would say, so
Jason,
yeah, I like so there's three core principles that we kind of learn and well that we bring to the table in recovery and that's honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, and kind of without those we're fucked, right? So I've been able to apply those in my life and in my sobriety, and that just doesn't um, yeah, like I'd say the willingness part. Like, first of all, I need to be honest with myself, to be honest with people around me. I need to be open-minded enough to know that, okay, like something else is going on for me, and then have enough willingness to just ask for help, have some humility. And I guess that's really what it was. I would say, like, I just didn't want to um I didn't, as much as I didn't I didn't want that to happen, but I know in order for that not to happen, there needed to be some action attached to it. So I couldn't just like sit there and be like, oh, like um I don't want to die. But it's almost like um it's an analogy when, like, the guy's in the ocean, he's drowning, and someone throws him a life preserver, and then he doesn't take it. So, like, we can sit and we can pray all we want for help, but if we don't take the action, like, that's the best way I can describe it. So for me at that time, the action was asking for help and going to the hospital. Yeah.
this it's extremely insightful thing to say and to do. And I think men being men, we're thankfully we're at a time when that's nowhere near what it was, say, even 20 years ago. But
Mm-hmm.
very hard thing to do. Very proud of you for doing that.
Mhm.
Right? It's yeah.
I agree. Like, I think, it sounds like you're in a better place. So it's like to sort of sit here today and to say, well, we learned these things, and those things stuck with you, obviously. And even in that moment, that those thoughts were there. And obviously there was some battle in your mind, I'm guessing, at that point. But still, the fact that that those principles were still with you is really amazing. But I do appreciate that it's one thing to sit here today and to say, well, I know these 3 things and I put them into action, but in that moment, it's like that, I can imagine for people who find themselves in that situation, that's the hard part. Like the hard part is to sit there and to do or to apply, those sorts of things.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think like for me, I've talked about this quite a bit. It's easy for me to show up to to go to a meeting when I feel like going to a meeting, but it's like it's those moments when I don't feel like going that count the most, and it's easy. At the end of the show, we're gonna do the gratitude list, right? And so one thing I learned, because I would always say I learned that gratitude was an action word. I learned that early in recovery, and did my actions always reflect my gratitude? And the answer is no. So I can say I'm grateful for you guys, and I can treat you guys like shit. So there's a disconnect there, right? I'm grateful for my family, but I never come around. I'm grateful for my friends. I lie to them and I break plans, so it's easy for me. It's Chuck and I talked about this too. It matters most for me to try to find gratitude when things are not going to plan, and what does the plan mean anyway? I'm like, I don't know. And you think there needs to be like an acceptance piece that this might not be what I want right now, but this is what it is, and how do I get out of this? And it's usually more times than not just being honest and asking for help, and not only asking for help, receiving the help, taking the suggestions, taking the action. It's easy to reach out for help. I don't want to say it's easy, but that's one part of it. That's one part of it. If I'm not willing to put in the action myself, I'm not, I wouldn't be here right now. It's like even coming to recovery and it's like, yeah, we suggest, yeah, I need help. Like I'm fucked. Like, yeah, we get it. You're here. Right. So it's like, well, we suggest that you get a home group, you get a service position, you get a sponsor. And it's like, yeah, no, whoa, like I got this from here, and that was me for like 15 years. Right. So I think we need to also be willing to, and whatever that looks like. To me, it's easy to identify a problem. That's super easy. It's like, oh, like I don't feel good. It's like, why don't I feel good? Well, I've been eating like shit. I haven't been going to the gym. It's like, okay, well, eat good and go to the gym, right? But sometimes I feel like the resistance to change gets in my way a lot of the time, I would say. And I know that's common for like a lot of people. It's not like an easy thing, but I think it just starts with like, I think it has to be, I think too, a lot of it has to come from within the individual, right? We can't carry people along. Unfortunately, I wish we can do that, especially when it comes to, recovery. I wish I could just give people willingness and give them desperation, because I don't want them to die and I want them to get this, but like we just do our part and that's it, unfortunately, right? And it's funny because like people with substance use disorders is like, as far as Lisa, you can probably speak to this, but it's like, they end up finding their way into recovery, whatever that looks like, and you have somebody tell them like, okay, if you don't do this and this and this, you're probably going to die, and it's like, well, how long do you think, how long can I hang on for? And it's like, no, I think I got this, because you were talking about the diabetes thing, right? Like we're going to take the insulin or whatever, but it's like, okay, here's your insulin. It's probably going to save your life being, recovery. And it's like, no, like I got this from here, right? And that was me too. I literally had somebody say, if you don't do this, based on your history, you're probably going to die. And my thinking was so fucking insane that I started like negotiating that. Do you know what I mean? And questioning it.
Yeah.
It's fucking wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true, like that objectivity, right? And being on the outside of something. I mean, I feel like I experience that all the time at work, right? It's just like, yeah, I'll see people and I'm like this is really, really, really bad. Like we got to do something. And they'll minimize it. They'll justify it. They'll, project it. I sit there and there's only so much you can do, right? Until the person is ready.
Yeah. I try not to and again, I hear all sorts of shit and all sorts of excuses. I think I just went on one of my Facebook rants about it. Like, okay, so people end up, they come in, let's just say they end up in of the rooms of AA or NA or CA, right? Super broken, super desperate, like they're going to die. They were, they were homeless. They were committing crimes. They haven't eaten in fucking 4 days. They haven't slept. Come in there begging for help, crawl in there literally. And then it's like, okay, like there's some fucking requirements and these are the things that you need to do if you want to stay clean and sober and have an amazing life. Fuck that. I don't want to pray. I don't want to meditate. I don't want to go to meetings. It's just like, well, you just said you were willing to do anything,
Yeah.
And I was that person.
It's that addict brain, right? You get
Totally.
2 days removed from the situation.
Oh, yeah.
And you get immediately, I think the minute you're out of the situation, the minimizing starts, and then it's on a sliding scale from there. It just continues until you're right back out there.
Totally,
right?
yeah. And it's like we think we know better, right? I think I still know better. Today's the reality is like I don't, but it's just like and it's like I think there's like an attitude of like defiance as well. Like you can't tell me like what to do, and I know best. And it's just like, well, if we really knew best, we wouldn't be here asking for help. And it's like, look at your life is like pretty fucked, right?
And you can quickly lose sight of that, though, right?
Totally.
Very quickly.
I can't.
I think that's part of what also for me, right, speaks to capacity in somebody with active addiction. Is that contradiction? It's just like, but like you just said this, and now you're saying like, when someone has capacity to make a decision, usually they get information, they weigh it out, they make a decision, and then their planning is in accordance with all the things they've said. But somebody with substance use disorder, their behaviors and their plans contradict all the things they're telling you are wrong every step of the way. And so it's just like,
Absolutely.
Well,
a funny thing I've been experiencing lately, if I can interrupt some of my own shit here for a second. If you remember, Lisa, back when I was still in Calgary, one of the things that I talked about quite often was the closest I'd come to relapse, or at least the thought of relapse was that, the idea that I could go back and just, self-medicate for the ADHD when it got to be too much. We talked about that. Even now, I live a pretty great life. Right? I live this calm life. I'm in Thailand. I have my dog, very serene. I live 10 minutes from a really busy beach, but everything around me is calm and serene. I live in the country, but I live close to the beach and everything is great. Do you know what I miss the most now? Is the fucking chaos. It's the thing, like it is. And Jason, I'm sure you can relate to that. And at least I'm sure you've seen plenty of it, right? I miss it so much. I miss turning a dime into a dollar. I miss the constant hustle, the grind, the people, right? Because you're always surrounded in people and weird shit happening, and it was sometimes entertaining and sometimes scary. And somehow I miss that. Right. And even now. So it's over time, you very quickly lose sight of it. And I don't know that if I was in Calgary or Regina or whatever still, that I would be easily avoiding that. I think it would take a lot of work for me to not get back into it. And I'm sure it wouldn't start with using, but it would probably end with using. Right? that want of, you lose sight of what it was like, and you start to glorify it in your own head.
And too, when you spend,
I remember having stacks of money, more than I remember being fucking taken hostage and thinking I was going to die. Right. Like if you can imagine, somehow that's happened. Right. So go ahead.
Even, it's to do with the amount of time you spend in that state of being. And so, if you spend a large part of your life living in a state of chaos, then chaos is actually comfortable for people, right? It's like if you take a child who grows up in a chaotic home environment, whether it's substances or domestic violence or abuse of some kind, they will grow up, and part of the repetitive pattern of continuing to create drama in their lives and in their relationships is that that's where they're comfortable. And why? Because they grew up that way. And so, when things are calm and serene, it can be really uncomfortable for people who are accustomed to living in chaos.
Right. I don't even know if uncomfortable is the right word, because that is comfortable, right?
Yeah.
Like you're comfortable.
Yeah.
But you just don't feel, it's off-putting almost.
Yeah.
Like kind of like, doesn't feel natural, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And then there's that, of course, there's some part of the addict brain that says you don't deserve this life, right? And so somewhere deep-seated shit is happening, and we should burn it all to the ground, right?
Yeah.
Which is my pattern anyway, right? And I think, Jason, from what I understand about your story, is pretty clear pattern as well, right? Do well. Yeah. Let's get the match of kerosene out.
And the other thing I would put to you is so there might be the missing the chaos, but is there also just the fact that maybe there's loneliness, and that there's an awareness that substances will numb out the loneliness?
Absolutely, there is. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. I would, and this is not something I've said out loud to a single soul before now, but the last 3 months, I don't think a day's gone by where I haven't thought about getting high.
Mhm.
Right? I'm in a place, I'm in a healthy place. The fact that I just said that out loud tells me that I'm in a pretty good place. Because if I wasn't, we all know that I wouldn't be saying it out loud. I would be thinking it and planning, right?
Mhm.
But there hasn't been a single day, right? Where it's, somewhere in the back of my mind, it's like, fuck, it'd be nice to be high, because I am alone,
Mhm.
right? So, might want to address that one. Hey, fuck.
Mhm. But that's the whole thing, right? Is that when those thoughts are there, it's exploring for yourself where they come from, right? And it's like, well, I'm used to chaos, so this feels boring, or I'm lonely, or
Absolutely.
like understanding what those drivers are, because if you can identify them, then you can try to do something about them.
Well, and that last Christmas, I fortunately, and I'm sure you remember this, Lisa, but I was in a really bad, like I was not in a good place a year ago, right? Well, whatever, almost a year ago now. And I was thinking about having a drink, smoking a joint. It's all over the place. There's party land, Thailand, right? But then when I came out of that funk, that depressive state, I don't know if depression would be the right diagnosis, but certainly a depressive state. When I came out of that a few months later, and I was fortunately, I was insightful about my own shit enough to say, I don't feel like having a drink. I don't feel like smoking a joint, because I'm feeling good.
Mm.
So now I can see that, right? I can see that. So when I'm thinking about getting high, it's because something else in my life isn't going well, and I need to address that. So I'm not thinking about getting high. Right. So fortunately that experience played out the way that it did. And I didn't end up doing something that I would regret down the road. And it really allowed me to go back now and just remember that, wait a minute, when you feel like this, you don't feel like this when things are good. You don't do that. So let's improve the things. So, right. Jason, it looks like you're being rather insightful. So we'll get some thoughts about you on that before we head into gratitudes, because we're at the hour mark. So, yeah.
Just to echo what you're saying, Chuck, I know for myself, a lot of the dangerous places for me to be is when it was also the highs and when things are going great. And what
Chris has said that so many times. Yeah.
What
Absolutely.
not better way to
40,000
celebrate
downloads this month
to make this
let's
better,
celebrate.
So but definitely I can
I deserve it. That's such a cliche thing to say, right? I've gone this long, I deserve it.
Well,
but
it's pretty insane. It's like, I'm gonna burn my life down because like things are going great, right? And like it's yeah.
Absolutely. Lisa, do you have any final thoughts before we get into daily gratitudes?
No, I just thank you, Jason, for being vocal and sharing about this stuff, because I don't think
that's
it's
a gratitude. I didn't introduce the gratitude.
This isn't my gratitude. I have another gratitude.
Okay.
This is my pre-gratitude.
I'm sorry, right? I'm wrong. Okay.
But I don't think that it's talked about often enough. Like, we'll often say that there's no one solution to addiction in terms of, harm reduction and residential and all these things. But I don't think that even we talk about enough the fact that, one person's recovery journey is not going to be single solutioned, so whether that's your meetings and your private therapist, and maybe it's group therapy, and maybe it's a psychiatrist, and maybe it's treating your testosterone, and maybe it's being on an antidepressant, and like there's so many pieces to it, and we don't really talk explicitly about that part of it. And today I still, like I said, I still have patients tell me I'm afraid to tell my sponsor, or I'm afraid to be open at a meeting that I, been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder and they want to treat me for it. And so, to know that, you may bring that up in your own meetings, and the gift that is to the people in your meeting, the fact that you'll share about it on your Facebook page or social media, where people, it can be shared even more broadly than in a meeting that you're sitting in. I do think that that's a real gift to people. So I love having you here, but I'm just thankful that you're doing that.
No kidding, right?
Yeah.
No kidding. Well said, Lisa. Well said.
Thanks, Lisa.
Before we get into the gratitudes, there's a message that I do want to bring into every episode that I remember to bring it into, Lisa, and that comes from you over some things you said in our last recording. if anybody out there is struggling, reach out, right? Reach out. Just reach out. I do my own monologue, and that's great. But I think about, if you're struggling, just remember to reach out. If you're listening to this right now, it's just too important, right? If you've relapsed, tell somebody, right? Tell somebody, and your people will come. They will come. I've watched that reel I've made of you, Lisa, here, just the one that you released yesterday, I guess, 100 times, and every time I watch it, I tear up still, because I know what drove that conversation, right? So, yeah. So, anyway, let's shift focus onto something more positive. And that's my favorite part of the show, the daily gratitudes. Jason, what you got for some gratitude today?
It's funny because I fucking write these down, and then
I was just thinking, like, you fucking known you've been coming on for a week and a half, bro. Like, you don't have a fucking gratitude ready, right? I'm just kidding.
I feel like I've exhausted. I didn't exhaust them, but I already wrote down a pretty long list. But yeah, I'm just grateful for the simple things. I'm just grateful to be alive today. Grateful for recovery, to help carry the message and let people know that there's help out there. Grateful for my family. Grateful for I'm grateful for to have gratitude. Go with that one.
That's a new one. I don't think we've heard that one, right? Yeah. Good.
That's a good one.
Good. Lisa, what are you grateful for today?
So my dad rode his motorbike out to visit my brother. So he's out there at the moment, and
last trip of the year kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's been riding forever, but I'm always a little bit nervous, because it's like bikes, even if you're the most safe bike rider in the world, it's like, it's just it's riskier. And so he made it. So I'm grateful for that. He's getting to spend time with my brother, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful, Jason, that you're here. I'm grateful that you asked for help. I can tell you that I would be really, really sad if that had gone differently. And so, yeah, maybe it's a bit selfish, but I'm grateful that you asked for help and that you're still here.
I would be remiss if I didn't echo that. Not just grateful that you're here saying the things that you are, right? And that you're, that I think it's a really important message. And as I said earlier in this recording, I think if that is the hill you found to plant your flag, it's a great place to do that. And it's a great message to carry. And, if you're going to be passionate about something, that's a great thing to be passionate about. So thank you. Thank you for that. Right. I'm also grateful. I don't know if you saw my post. Often I sit and I think about things. And so a year and a half ago, I start this platform, and I've got a Windows 7 laptop and no microphone, no headphones, about the same amount of knowledge about what to do. And then the other day I spent money I probably shouldn't have spent. Mom, if you're listening, probably going to be calling you. Fuck. Right? On an upgrade to the studio here. Some lighting and whatever. So I got my green screen thing back behind me here. But I think about the sponsorship that I've had, financially and personally, right? Though not 12-step sponsorship, but the amazing people in my life that over a year and a half that I've gotten to a point where, like, that's what I'm spending my money on now. It's not crack. It's like some lighting for this virtual studio thing. And I'm just so very, very grateful to all of them. One of which, of course, there's a lot, but one of which is Devo, Devin McGuire in the early days of the show, who committed a monthly sponsorship long before there was any value in it for him. And without him, I don't know that the show would be where it is today. Right. So, and my dog's making weird noises. Anyway, I'm also grateful to every single person who continues to like, comment, share, watch, click all the buttons down at the bottom. Every time you do these things, you're keeping me living my best life. And my best life is to continue making a humble living, spreading the message. And the message is this: if you're in active addiction right now, today could be the day. Today could be the day that you start a lifelong journey. Reach out to a friend, reach out to a family member, call into detox, pray, go to church. I don't care. Do whatever it is you have to do to get that journey started, because it is so much better than the alternative. If you have a loved one who's suffering an addiction right now, you're just taking the time to listen to this episode. If you just take 1 more minute out of your day and text that person, let them know they're loved. Use the words.
You are loved.
You are loved.
That little glimmer of hope just might be the thing that brings them back.